What if I told you there's a place in America where time gave up? A place not carved out by history, but sealed off by it. Where the blood runs thick, not with royalty, but with repetition. You weren't supposed to hear this story. You weren't supposed to look this deep. Because what you'll find isn't just a broken family tree. It's what happens when society turns its back and nature folds in on itself. This is the legacy of the Whittakers. And once you understand their truth, you can't unsee it. The town is called Odd, not metaphorically, literally. Odd, West Virginia, tucked between the mountains like a buried wound that never healed. No welcome sign, no Main Street parade, just gravel roads and whispers, if you listen closely enough. Here, the Whittaker family survives, barely. But their survival is a kind of haunting, not the ghostly kind, the genetic kind. Their story didn't begin with a curse. It began with neglect. A century ago, their ancestors settled in isolation, cut off from the world, not by design, but by indifference. The community was small, the choices even smaller. And over generations, necessity became tradition. Cousins married cousins. Siblings blurred into partners. The tree didn't grow, it bent inward. Branches twisted into knots of silence, of shame, of survival. They weren't kings or queens like the inbred monarchs of Europe, but the same logic ruled their fate. Protect the bloodline, stay within the known. It wasn't about pride, it was about proximity, about survival in the cracks of a forgotten world. And then came the children, born not just into poverty, but into a closed genetic loop. No new code, no fresh breath, just mutations whispering through every cell, physical deformities, cognitive collapse, language stripped down to grunts and gestures. And still, they were invisible, because that's what happens to stories that make people uncomfortable. They vanish, until someone digs them back up. In 2020, a lens found the Whittakers. Mark Laita, a photographer known for showcasing the unseen, captured something more than just faces. He exposed a wound. What he recorded in Odd was not a freak show. It was America's reflection in a broken mirror. A nation that pretends the past is over while it's still breathing in the hills. You see Timmy, pacing, grunting, unblinking. You see Lorraine, the silent matriarch, eyes heavy with generations of sorrow. And you hear Ray, the only voice among them, trying to explain what cannot be explained. These aren't monsters. These aren't characters. They are what happens when no one comes, when poverty collides with genetics, when forgotten families build their own cages from desperation. But let me ask you something darker. What if the real horror isn't the inbreeding? What if the real horror is how easy it is for the world to look away? This isn't a ghost story. This is real. This is now. And every second you keep watching, you're stepping deeper into the silence America chose. Not by accident, by design. Because you see, what happened to the Whittakers wasn't just personal. It was structural. It was systemic. You think the Whittakers were a glitch in the system? No. They were the product of it. What happened in Odd, West Virginia didn't grow wild like an accident of nature. It was cultivated, bred not just by blood, but by absence. The absence of infrastructure, the absence of education, the absence of care. This wasn't just a forgotten town. It was designed to be forgotten. Think about that. The roads to Odd aren't just narrow, they're vanishing. Maps barely show it. Funding never reached it. No schools to teach genetics, no clinics to test DNA, no therapists to diagnose developmental disorders. Just a family trapped in a valley, generation after generation, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence. This is the real psychological control system, not built by whips and chains, but by neglect. It's harder to detect and more effective. You don't have to control people if you erase them from the plan.
The Whittakers didn't choose this fate. They inherited it. And the institutions that were supposed to break the cycle never showed up. Government? Absent. Healthcare? Non-existent. Social programs? Too far, too late. What filled that void wasn't help. It was silence. And in that silence, something ancient came back to life, a kind of primal tribalism. Protect your own, keep to your kin, don't ask questions, don't reach out, because no one's reaching back. And here's the darkest part. This isn't unique. There are dozens of towns like Odd, hidden between America's teeth, slowly rotting, forgotten by design. Appalachia, rural Mississippi, the Navajo Nation. Places where systems aren't just failing, they've been programmed to fail. Where isolation becomes identity. Where shame replaces knowledge. Where family trees don't branch, they loop. And when that loop tightens, you get collapse. Mental, physical, emotional. But the institutions, the ones with the power to intervene, they only act when cameras roll, when stories go viral, when the freak show gets clicks. You saw it happen with the Whittakers. Before 2020, no one cared. After one video, millions watched. Donations came. Journalists wrote think pieces. Podcasters debated ethics. But let's be clear, what changed wasn't the family. It was our awareness of them. And that awareness is the most dangerous thing of all. Because once you see the machinery, you realize this isn't a story about one family. It's a system of spiritual imprisonment, an ecosystem of neglect, a perfect storm of policy, poverty, and silence, creating the illusion of choice where none exists. And if that sounds familiar, it's because you live in it too. Not as visibly, not as dramatically, but in other ways. Trapped in systems you didn't design, following paths you didn't choose, silently obeying rules no one remembers writing. The Whittakers are just the extreme. They are what happens when the algorithm of society runs unchecked, when the code loops too long without an update. And now that we've seen it, we have a choice – to understand or to scroll past. But before you decide, I want you to do something. Comment this phrase below, twice. I break the loop. Write it, seal it, not just for engagement, but to declare war on silence, to signal that you see what's really happening, that you're not just watching this, you're waking up to it. They told you inbreeding was a rural problem, that it belonged to poor, forgotten places. But they lied. Because long before the Whittakers, long before Odd, West Virginia ever existed, bloodlines were folding inward inside castles, not cabins, thrones, not trailers, golden halls, not Hunno Mountains. And the people doing it weren't seen as cursed. They were seen as divine. The ancient kings of Europe, the Habsburgs, the Ptolemies, the Romanovs, all obsessed with one thing – purity. Bloodlines so sacred, so chosen that they refused to mix them with outsiders. They married sisters, they wedded cousins, fathers gave daughters to uncles. This wasn't madness to them, it was policy, a command from God, they believed. But God doesn't override genetics.
The price was always the same. Go back through time and you'll find it. The Spanish Habsburgs, Charles II, born with a jaw so distorted he couldn't chew food, and a mind that never fully formed. His family tree? Less of a tree, more of a circle. His mother was also his niece. Royal doctors whispered prayers, but the truth was written in his DNA. Now pause. Look at Timmy Whittaker, grunting, pacing, unable to speak, not because of sin, not because of some curse, but because his genetics were locked in a feedback loop. The same pattern, the same collapse. Do you see the mirror yet? The same process, different scenery. One wears a crown, the other wears torn flannel. But both are victims of the same lie, that blood is power, that purity is sacred, that keeping it in the family means keeping it strong. No, it means keeping it small. It means entropy, mutation, cognitive failure, generational erasure dressed up as tradition. Whether in the gilded halls of Vienna or the wooded paths of odd West Virginia, the result is the same, suffering passed down like an heirloom. And here's where it gets darker, because those royal bloodlines, they didn't stop. They evolved. They left the castles and entered the boardrooms, the secret societies, the global organizations. You think old money doesn't protect itself the same way? You think political dynasties don't keep their circles tight? Look again. Look at how names repeat in families of power. Look at the intermarriages of elite political families. Look at how billion-dollar empires hand off leadership not to the most qualified, but to their own blood. It's not always genetic inbreeding now. It's ideological, philosophical, institutional. It's thought inbreeding. When the same minds, raised with the same beliefs, raised by the same lineage, inherit the same power, the loop continues. No new ideas, no outside correction, just the echo chamber of legacy. This is how power protects itself, by folding inward. The Whittakers are just the visible scar of this pattern, but the disease runs far deeper. In ancient Rome, they believed emperors were gods, so they married their sisters to preserve the divine bloodline. Today, we don't call them gods, we call them CEOs, presidents, founders, kings in better suits. And still, the same system endures. Insulate the power, keep the truth within, punish outsiders. The result? Collapse. Not just of genetics, but of morality, of empathy, of imagination. Because a system that only feeds itself eventually eats itself. You're beginning to see it, aren't you? That what happened in Odd isn't isolated. It's the clearest, rawest, most uncomfortable reflection of the world you live in. A world that still worships the myth of pure blood, sacred blood, deserving blood.
But blood isn't truth. It's memory. And memory fades when it's never challenged. Which brings us to the next descent. You were born into a system long before you could speak. A system that shaped what you believe is possible, who you think you are, and what you think you deserve. Not with chains, but with stories. Stories about family, about pride, about who's good and who's not, about why the world is the way it is and why it can't be any different. That's psychological inbreeding. A loop of ideas passed down generation after generation without challenge, without change, mutating in silence, just like genes. You didn't choose these thoughts. You inherited them. And if you never question them, they will destroy you just as surely as any genetic defect. Look again at the Whittakers. Timmy doesn't speak, but he wasn't born evil. Lorraine doesn't emote, but she wasn't born cruel. Ray tries to explain what he doesn't understand because he's the only one left with language. Their minds were shaped by isolation, just like yours. The difference? Yours is digital. You are raised by algorithms, by curated feeds, by opinion loops that reward outrage and punish curiosity. Every time you like, follow, or block, you trim your mental family tree until only the familiar remains, only the safe, only what you already believe. And what does that create? Cognitive collapse. Not of speech or movement, but of vision, of imagination, of inner power. Just like inbreeding breaks the body, mental loops break the will. You stop thinking you can change. You stop believing the system can be wrong. You learn to call confinement comfort. You become a citizen of the cage, and worse, its defender. How do you escape? By doing what most men never dare. You question the blood. You question the beliefs. You look at your father, your grandfather, your traditions, your gods, and you ask, is this mine? Or was this handed to me by someone still trapped in their own loop? That's where transformation begins. Because here's a truth no one told you. Every bloodline that folds inward dies. And every mind that stops expanding collapses. They don't put that on motivational posters. They put it in vaults. Because the world doesn't want awakened men. It wants obedient ones. Silent ones. Ones who think they're free while living out inherited scripts. The Whittakers couldn't escape their genetic fate, but you can still break your psychological one. But only if you're willing to descend even deeper. Because there's a part of this story that hasn't been told. One darker than the biology, more disturbing than the isolation, and more common than you think. A force that doesn't just keep people ignorant, it rewards ignorance.
It pays for it. It weaponizes it. There is a sickness in the world, more contagious than any virus, more crippling than any disease. It feeds not on flesh, but on awareness. And its most terrifying feature? It rewards those who stay asleep. You've seen its symptoms. Minds that cannot reason beyond what they're told. Men who defend the very systems that chain them. Families who repeat the same cycles, abuse, addiction, poverty, and call it normal. Generations who suffer, but never ask why. And behind it all, a structure. Not built of brick or bone, but belief. A hidden architecture, invisible, unspoken, and devastating. This isn't a conspiracy. This is engineering. Societal engineering. Cultural inbreeding. A deliberate suppression of truth, insight, and self-mastery. You were taught history in fragments. You were taught science with blinders. You were taught morality as obedience. And every system you trusted, from education to entertainment, was designed not to liberate you, but to contain you. To turn men into products, into patterns, into predictable, obedient minds. How? By rewarding your blindness. You get promotions for compliance. You get praise for silence. You get entertainment that sedates, news that divides, and schools that memorize but never awaken. And if you question it, you're labeled dangerous, unstable, conspiratorial. Just like those who once questioned royal inbreeding were exiled or executed, today those who question institutional inbreeding are shadow banned, fired, erased. The system doesn't fight with fists anymore. It fights with visibility. It hides you. Just like the Whittakers were hidden in the hills of West Virginia for decades, until a camera found them. But here's the difference. The Whittakers never had a choice. You do. And that is what they fear most. A man who sees the machine and walks away from it. Not with anger, but with power. That's why you're here. Not to watch a spectacle, but to confront the mirror. Because what happened to that family, the closed loop, the collapse, the silence, is happening all around you. In your city, in your workplace, in your relationships, and maybe even in your mind. But what if you could break the pattern? What if you could deprogram the loops?
Not just for yourself, but for the bloodline that comes after you. It starts with one action, one identity shift. That's why I'm going to ask you again, and this time, mean it. Scroll down, comment this phrase twice. I break the loop. Seal it with clarity. Not for clicks, not for ego, for truth. Because every generation has a moment where one man stands at the edge and decides the curse ends with him. Maybe that man is you. And if you're ready to go further, then you're ready for what comes next. Now we speak the names, because a curse doesn't break by silence. It breaks by confrontation. You want to know who kept the loop alive? Who built the walls so high around minds and bloodlines that collapse became inevitable? It wasn't just families. It was institutions. Governments that needed obedient workers, not awakened leaders. Schools that drilled facts but buried curiosity. Religions that offered salvation only if you submitted. Corporations that fed you pleasure while starving your power. And media that sold you fear, division, and distraction wrapped in high definition. These are the architects of the cage, and they operate with one goal: control through comfort. Because a man addicted to comfort will never question the source of his suffering. He'll blame himself. He'll say, that's just the way life is. He'll pass it down to his son. He'll tell his daughter not to dream too loud. He'll become a priest of the very prison that binds him. This is the final form of inbreeding, institutional submission. And it's everywhere. Governments write policies that ensure rural towns like Odd, West Virginia never get infrastructure, that healthcare never reaches the hills, that education remains a whisper behind the mountains. Why? Because isolation is cheaper than intervention. Let the poor implode quietly. Let the Whittakers become a myth instead of a mandate. And while you watch from your screen, they'll hand you a new distraction. Another war, another celebrity meltdown, another outrage to fill your mind just long enough to forget the truth. You are being conditioned. Now listen closely. Churches tell you your suffering is divine, that submission is holy, that silence is strength. But behind those altars, bloodlines, inherited wealth, hierarchies that never change, a spiritual monarchy masquerading as salvation. And still, you obey. Corporations, meanwhile, have replaced your community with algorithms, your tribe with followers, your purpose with products. They don't need to enslave you, they just need to keep you scrolling, consuming, doubting yourself just enough to stay buying. And when someone wakes up,
when someone says, wait, what is this system really for? They label him crazy, a conspiracy theorist. They exile him digitally, socially, financially, just like ancient societies exiled the one who refused to marry their cousin. Different methods, same outcome. Silence the dissenter. Preserve the loop. And that's the truth they never wanted you to hear. The Whittakers weren't just forgotten, they were allowed. Allowed to collapse, allowed to suffer, because they were never profitable, never powerful, never loud enough to matter. Until one camera made them visible. And now you've seen them. Now you've heard what happens when institutions protect themselves at all costs, when tradition outweighs transformation, when the system would rather watch a family disintegrate than lift a finger to save it. But let me tell you something. The loop is not unbreakable. Power does not belong to bloodlines. It belongs to awareness, to the man who looks back at his lineage, his beliefs, his traditions, and says, "Not anymore." Because that's how the blood changes, not by accident, by defiance. So now, here you are. You've heard the story of a family buried by silence. You've seen how systems choose which bloodlines to preserve and which ones to erase. You've walked through the shadows of forgotten towns, ancient empires, and modern institutions, and you didn't flinch. But this final section? This one isn't about the Whittakers. It's not about kings or corruption. It's about you. Because whether you were born in odd West Virginia or in the heart of a glowing city, you were born into a loop, a story someone else began writing for you. The question is, do you keep reading it? Or do you tear the page? You've been told who to trust, who to love, who to fear, how to speak, how to pray, how to die. Every piece of you that feels unchosen was chosen for you. Your job, your habits, your beliefs about power, about women, about freedom, about what's possible for your life. You did not choose the loop, but only you can break it. Because if you don't, it will repeat. Your children will carry the same shame you swallowed. Your son will inherit your silence. Your daughter will call your limits normal. And the bloodline won't collapse like the Whittakers.
It'll just fade into mediocrity, into obedience, into another man who almost woke up. But you didn't come here to fall back asleep, did you? You came because something deep inside you recognized this story, not the inbreeding, not the tragedy, but the pattern. The unspoken pattern behind everything, looping in your job, your thoughts, your family, your failures. That ancient hum that whispers, "This is all there is." But it's a lie. There is more. There is you unlooped, unlocked, unowned. But it requires fire. The kind that burns the script you were handed. The kind that silences every voice that told you to stay small, stay safe, stay loyal to a life you didn't choose. This is not about rebellion. This is about remembrance of the man you were before the loop, before you inherited someone else's fears, before you were taught to call survival success. You have seen now what happens when no one says no. To the pattern, to the silence, to the sacred bloodline. And now you must decide, do you become another closed branch, or do you become the break? Because the Whittaker's story, their visible collapse, is a warning. But you can be a signal, a rupture in the timeline, a man who doesn't just wake up, but rises. So, if you're still here, if you felt this in your bones, then don't just comment for the algorithm. Declare it again, out loud, like a vow. I break the loop. I break the loop. Say it until you feel it rattle your ribs, until it burns down every inherited belief you never agreed to carry, until you remember what it feels like to belong to yourself, because that's what this was all about. Not exposing a cursed family, but liberating the parts of you still trapped in a loop you didn't create. You were not them. but you were this close to becoming something just as lost. And now, you're not. You're awake. You're dangerous. And you're free. Welcome to the outside. This is where the loop ends, and your real life begins. Fire. If you felt that in your chest, you're not alone. This isn't just a story you watched. It's a mirror. You survived. And if you made it this far, you're not the same man you were when this video started. Now it's your move. Comment below, "I break the loop." I break the loop. Let the algorithm know that you're one of us, the awakened few. Let the world know you see through the veil now. Checkmark. Subscribe if you're done with being lied to. Bell, because the next video, it'll go even deeper. Secrets they'll wish you never heard. Comment. Share this with one man who needs to hear it. One man stuck in silence, waiting for a signal. This isn't entertainment. This is a transmission. And you just became part of the rebellion. Stay sharp, stay awake. We're just getting started.